question and answer section. And I'd like to welcome you all to the inaugural Zoom Cocktails and Conversations, and thank you for hanging in there through these technical difficulties. This is the first time that Bob and I have tried anything like this, so we're hoping it goes smoothly, but hopefully you'll forgive us if there are some snags. And I'd like to tell you that during this time of uncertainty, the Beckler has remained committed to connecting with our audiences and sharing the joy of the museum's collection through new initiatives and modifications to existing ones, such as this night's program. I'm sure that many of you have seen our new Museum from Home webpage, where we've aggregated our communal efforts, and if you haven't, I encourage you to go there under the Visit section on the Bechtler Museum homepage. I've been working with our educators and our program teams to develop new educator guides and at-home art activities, and we're considering new ways to continue our programming with our community members that need our services most during this time. And we are currently developing art kits that are going to be dropped off at the jail arts initiative jails that we work with, which we're really excited about. And I would, I have to mention that we'd be lost without our interim CEO, Bruce LaRoe. We couldn't ask for a better leader during this time. He has been truly phenomenal, and I hope he is on this call. I haven't seen him pop up yet, but thank you, Bruce. For those of you that do not know me, I feel like I've met most of you who are in this event. My name is Anastasia James, and I am the new curator at the Bechtler Museum of Modern Art. I arrived in December, just before Christmas, so coming up on almost 6 months here in Charlotte, and I truly love it here, even though I've been stuck in my house for 2 of those months. Initially, this event was supposed to take place within the exhibition 10, which I'm sure that many of you were able to see before the shutdown. If you haven't been able to see it, it will still be up when we reopen. And I encourage you to reach out to me, and I'm happy to give you a tour of that exhibition, kind of a replacement. I look forward to welcoming you back into the museum as soon as we're able to safely reopen. And tonight I'm welcomed by 2 very special guests, and I'm endlessly grateful for their kindness and willingness to participate in this conversation. Together, we will be showing you a few slides featuring works from the Bechtler Collection as they were installed originally in the Beckler's home in Zurich. And I will be introducing each image, and Vivi and Tanja will be sharing their insights and memories, which are far more valuable than any facts that I can offer about the artwork. So I'd like to give a warm welcome to Tanja Beckler and Vivi Beckler-Smith, who should be appearing at the top of your grid of speakers. So welcome. I know no one can hear us laugh, but
Anastasia, for the introduction.
Thank you
for having us. Lovely to be here.
So we're going to move right into the first slide. As many of you know, the origins of the Bechtler Collection began with a love for the arts that's been passed down through generations in the Bechtler family. And when we talk about the art now in the collection of the Bechtler Museum, we're talking about the art that was originally collected by the parents of our founder, Andreas Bechtler, Hans and Bessie Bechtler. They began collecting in earnest after purchasing this house in Zurich just after World War II. And over many decades, they built a collection that is best described as spontaneous in nature, driven by both their personal tastes and also their personal relationships with artists and dealers throughout Europe. This collection was eventually passed down to their children. And here is a photo of the exterior of the house featuring 2 large sculptural works that are currently in the Bechtler's collection, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with. The first sculpture in the foreground is by the British sculptor Barbara Hepworth. It's titled Model for Meridian from 1958. And it was based off of a public commission that Hepworth received for the State House in London that same year. This model is an edition of 6, and it was created by her Zurich art dealer from whom the Bechtlers purchased the work in 1961. And in the background, you can see one of my favorite works in the collection by Germaine Richier. This work's an excellent example of her practice. She was classically trained. She apprenticed with one of Rodin's students before breaking off onto her own and kind of breaking all expectations of what she could do as a sculptor. In 1939, her life changed dramatically when the outbreak of the war in Europe caught her and her husband in Switzerland, where they decided to stay instead of returning to Paris. And that was where Grasshopper was made, our large grasshopper sculpture. Both Hans and Walter acquired multiple works by Richier in 1957, and this is just one example of them. But I'd like to ask Vivi and Tanja to kind of jump in and talk about the house and what we're looking at here.
Yeah, so when I look at this picture, the first thing I think of is hanging on the arms of the grasshopper woman and climbing on her back and thinking she was very ugly, but a lot of fun to climb on top and play on. And my grandparents, they never said anything to us about not touching the art, not climbing on any of the sculptures, and there was more than one. Um, so that's my first memory when I look at the house. But um, I, the house basically is 4 stories. We can see 3 stories. The fourth story is down below because the house is actually built on a hill. And on the very bottom, which you can't see, is where there was a pool, an indoor pool. They also had an outdoor pool, which would, if you extend the picture further back, behind us, that's where the outdoor pool was. But since it was cold in Switzerland most of the year, it was not used very often. As far as the interior of the house, there was so much art that they had to literally stack it one on top of the other on the walls. So the house was just covered with beautiful pieces of art and everything from oil paintings to jewelry to even the furniture. So I didn't realize how precious it was when I was younger, but then as we grew up, we realized it was quite phenomenal. And I also didn't really know the names of many of the artists, and because we just went there to see our grandparents and have fun and have a good time together. But they did teach us the appreciation of art. So Vivi, what about you?
Um, so yes, I'm Vivi Beckler-Smith, and I moved with all the family to Charlotte from Zurich when I was 8 years old. However, I did visit and spend a big part of the summer here in Switzerland with my grandparents throughout every summer through college, and spent 2 months after college there working in Zurich, and continued visiting up until their deaths in '98 and 2001, my grandmother. And the house is a typical maybe not, but it is a very traditional house that you find in Switzerland. And when my grandparents purchased it, my father, I believe, was 13 years old. It was very traditional inside as well. And we will see in the next slides, managed to, my grandfather being the engineer, to completely redesign it and bring a very contemporary, modern look and feel to it. Lots of fun playing out here with the sculptures, fond memories of Frog Lady to me. I know it's Grasshopper. Trying hard when I was younger to figure out why this slide is so bumpy and rough. That was my memory when I was younger. A memory when I was quite a bit older. My grandfather already passed away in '98. My grandmother had us all come and visit, and she draped the arms of Grasshopper with, I don't know how many ties, but full of my grandfather's ties were on there. And she just had all of us come and she like, take, select ties. And so our husbands, families have beautiful ties as a remembrance from my grandfather, but it was just a lovely memory that I have towards the end of my grandparents' life. So,
oh, that's great. I hope there are photos of that somewhere.
There are photos of that, yeah.
Well, if we move forward and we go into the house, the first image that we see here, we're offered a glimpse into the dining room. And Seated behind this kind of decorative element here, this heart and this candelabra, is the Bechtler's housekeeper, Marisa, or Mezzi. Am I pronouncing that correctly? Mezzi, as she was known, Maisie, as she was known to the family. And behind Maisie is a very small painting by the artist Georges Rouault titled Paysage Biblique from 1950 that perhaps many of you are familiar with. It's currently on view in the exhibition 10 and has been on view in past exhibitions in recent years. And Vivi, you mentioned to me that this was your favorite painting in the collection, so I'm going to pick on you to go first.
It is my absolute favorite one. It is a very soothing image to me. I went to a Catholic kindergarten taught by nuns, very Catholic but fun at the same time. That piece is a very biblical piece. You can't see it all, but it is very unique to the collection because it's, to me, the only one that is picturesque and kind of sweet and biblical, and it spoke to a child, right, being in kindergarten. And it was also positioned in the dining room. So being in the dining room here, the table would be on the left of, if you go left of this picture. I was always seated next to my grandfather for meals. The meals were always formal. We always had silver. It was always just formal meals. And I just remember looking at that picture as we ate, and it was actually used to hang on the other wall. You can see a little nail perhaps where it used to hang. And so just fond memories of it, and just a very peaceful piece to me that is just dear, that I love. So.
And I think we know that this photo was taken sometime during a celebration, because we have this heart here. This wasn't a permanent installation in the house. It was something that someone brought over for an event of some sort. Is that correct?
Yes, we think it was our aunt.
Okay.
Our father's sister.
Mm-hmm.
But I also remember sitting, in this dining room. We would look outside, and there were all these wonderful bird feeders, and my grandparents just loved watching the birds, and we would have all kinds of varieties, 10 different varieties and they would always talk about that, how lovely that was. So in the morning especially, I remember we would usually go, before we moved, we usually would go over there on Sundays, and like Vivi said, it was always very formal. But I have one really funny memory of when we had already moved to America, and I brought an American friend over for a meal, and I said to her, okay, this is how you have to eat. It's formal. And so I showed her how to use the fork and the knife and the spoon, and how everything's laid out and how we do it. So we're practicing. And when it came time to have the meal, we went to visit in this exact dining room. It so happened that we had chicken, the thighs. And the first thing my grandfather did when it came out, he, with his hand, grabbed the chicken thigh, and he just took it out and took a bite out of it. Not the thigh, but the one with the bone. And so all of that practice of having to be formal, you could see he was just having so much fun. So they were formal people, but at the same time, they loved life, and they loved people and different cultures. Mm-hmm. So I have that as a very fond memory.
And I think that feeling is really shown in the collection because it's so spontaneous in nature. They bought what they loved when it was available to them. And like you said to me a few days ago, they would just find a place to hang it, even if they were out of room to hang artwork in the stairwell or in the living room. You'll see some of that in the upcoming photos. But
they did not purchase to see, okay, well, how does this fit in the house? If they loved something, they would find a spot and they would make it work.
That's so great. And I think it's worth mentioning that they hung works that they truly loved in the dining room. I think on the wall across from this is where they hung the Degas pastel. So this was a work that they held in very high regard. to give it such a place of prominence. And as we move into another room in the house, right now we're looking into the living room. This is really one of my favorite photographs that we're going to show you because there's just so much to unpack in it. And so many works in this photo are so central to the Bechtler Museum's collection. The large painting above the fireplace, I'm sure many of you recognize, is Landscape from 1952 by Nicolas de Stael. It was created during the height of the artist's artistic and commercial success, and it's one of the true gems of the museum's collection. On the left-hand side of the painting, we see another one of the museum's most prized works, The Torn Towel by Joan Miro. And as the story goes, while Hans was visiting Miro in his studio in 1963, he expressed interest in purchasing one of the artist's used paint rags, and Miro told him it was still in use and that he couldn't have it. But 18 months later, a package arrived in the mail, and inside of it was this paint rag, framed and inscribed to both Hans and Bessie, dedicating it to them and expressing how much joy it was to Miro to be able to give this work of art to them. So it's really a unique work of art in the collection that we have, and one of the works that is really fun to explain to kids when they come through to see the exhibitions. And in the background here, I'm not sure if it's cut off, but back here, there's the Marino Marini horse. That's really one of the favorites of the museum, which was sitting in the foyer. And over here, I think this is something we'll talk about a little bit. These are all of the print portfolios, or a few of the print portfolios in the collection. And you can see on the fireplace a variety of works, including some of the Giacomettis in our collection, family photographs, and works by Andreas Beckler. I didn't know if one of you wanted to jump in to talk about any of the details on here before we kind of zoom into the mantle.
Well, the little photograph sticks out to me because that's actually my father being held by Bessie, his mother. So that's just very sweet addition there. Mm-hmm. And the Durchstell, that was one of the pieces that our grandfather loved. He had more than one, but that definitely was one of them. And it has a lot of different layers in it, mm-hmm. a lot of different colors. Mm-hmm. And it really, I never understood really what exactly these figures are until I was much older. And I realized, oh, that's what abstract art is. The church that's just has the little rectangle, or the buildings and the different colors denoting maybe just the sky. Mm-hmm. So having grown up with the art, I feel I have a great appreciation, which I don't think I would have had otherwise, for abstract art. And I know a lot of people have a hard time looking at abstract art and saying, well, what is that? I don't understand it. But as we grew up with it, just appreciating the colors and the feel of the piece rather than the actual image. So that's something that I'm really just so grateful to my grandparents and our parents as well.
And it's actually surprisingly the only landscape in our collection, and he was really a master artist at combining landscape with abstraction. And as you mentioned, it appears to only have a few colors in it, but when you get up close to it in person, there's a million colors in this, and just layers and layers and layers of paint, and something that doesn't quite come across, you know, through an image. But I can only imagine being a little kid or even an adult and being able to spend so much personal time with it. It's really special. And I really, Vivi, would you share this story about the print portfolios? Because I think our audience might enjoy that.
Sure. And I do want to just quickly say that they also taught me the importance of art in your life. It was just important to be surrounded with, to them, with living with the art versus what is it on the wall, because we lived. We did not go and discuss, oh, this is this piece and this is by this artist, or this, we just lived like with the Marino Marini horse in the foyer. That was the entrance. You know, we walk in, you immediately hang your hat on there, you use it, you ride as a kid, you ride, you know, sit on the horse, and that was never, never were we told, don't touch, don't get on that. So it was very much part of furniture in a sense. It's what's in your house. The pieces that my grandfather really liked to share with us was the lithographs, and especially after dinner, we would come into the living room, and my grandfather would ask, go up and select one of the portfolio or the lithograph books, let's look through one together. And that gave him a lot of joy, sitting there and just admiring one litho after another in a book in the series. And he especially loved in the beginning with his index finger, I'll always remember that, pointing to the edition, the importance of the signature, the edition, and who it was, and then just spending time looking through one of the books.
And the care that he took, because these were sometimes very large books and heavy, and they had special coverings over each lithograph that he would carefully open up. So you knew, you didn't quite understand exactly the importance, but you knew it was something precious that you shouldn't touch.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. No, it's just such a fun little collection of objects. And I always like to see what people put on their mantles. And what's interesting about this mantle is this is where a lot of the Giacometti sculptures in the collection were placed. We see on the left-hand side of the mantle in this photo a number of small works that were made between 1937 and 1939. And these works were the result of a collaboration between Alberto Giacometti and Jean-Michel Frank, who was a French interior designer known for his minimalist interiors. The small female head that you see here, and I have a larger picture down here, was actually intended to be a knob for a small box that might have held jewelry or something like that. And then these two right here are actually buttons that were created for the French-Italian fashion designer Elsa Schiaparelli, who was best known for her work with the Surrealists. And we don't know if these buttons in particular were ever attached to clothing. They were purchased by the Bechtler family in 1981, but we do know that they were used on a jacket that Elsa designed that's shown here, which was owned by Marlene Dietrich. So it's kind of really interesting to think of Giacometti's work as being used on fashion. And if you know a lot about Giacometti or about his career, all of these works were created during what's known as his Surrealist period, when his work was a bit more idiosyncratic and, I like to say, more sensual. And I think the best example of that here is this necklace, which is just an exceedingly rare work in our collection because it's the only known example of it in existence. No one knows who it was commissioned for. There are a few models and studies and drawings for this piece, but it's one of a kind and truly unique in the body of Giacometti's work, and we're very lucky to have it. If you were to look on the right side of the fireplace, you would have noticed the sculpture Seated Woman. The model of this work was Giacometti's wife, Annette, who we have a number of portraits of in the collection. And the work depicts a seated nude with her hands folded gently in her lap. Her knees and the lower portion of her body merge into the shaped seat that attaches to a low plinth. What's interesting about this work is this work was purchased at the opening of a Giacometti exhibition at a gallery in Paris, the night of the opening and also the first night that Hans and Bessie met Giacometti and decided to buy a work right there on the spot. And now what I love about the story is that Hans talks about how in his memoir, he talks about how he really wanted to buy a sculpture of a dog that was in the exhibition, but Bessie put down her foot and insisted that they buy this sculpture. So I think that's one known case where we know that she really asserted, what she wanted to purchase for the collection, and I'm very happy she purchased this work. But I don't know if Tanja or Vivi, you wanted to add anything to what we see here on the mantelpiece? I know we talked about this work a little bit, which is not in the collection, but it is in your father's work.
I have the necklace for me that actually I remember her saying, oh, she doesn't usually wear that. She didn't usually wear that necklace because it's actually very heavy.
Yeah.
So I think I might have seen her wear it once.
Oh, wow. Okay.
But yeah, she didn't wear that too often. That little box we think was a gift, and Italo Valenti made it because he loved birds and he collected bird sculptures, little bird sculptures as well. I remember when I met him in his house and he showed us his bird collection. Actually, not the ones he made, from other people. So I think some of them were also his own. And I remember pointing to one, and I said, "Oh, that I was little." I said, "Oh, that I like that one." And he gave it to me actually, and it was made by an artist, but he was so generous. And my grandmother was like, "No, Valenti, Italo, you can't give this to the child. You can't give it to her." But he said he insisted. So
Great. He's a really, truly talented artist. We have a number of works by him in the collection.
Well, he was a very, very good close friend of my grandparents. In the summertime when they vacationed down in the Italian part of Switzerland, he would, with his wife, come over regularly, just to visit.
And this little work right here is a very tiny piece by him that we have in the collection. Let's see. The next photo, we're kind of looking at the other side of the living room. This kind of gives you a sense of what Tanja mentioned, how they modernized the interior of this traditional architecture. And what we're looking at here are a number of works that we do have in the collection and a few that we do not. This is a Ben Nicholson piece that is not in the museum's collection. You see Günter Hese's Ad Astra, which is currently on view in the exhibition 10, Chelida sculpture, which has been on view for quite some time, and the Gregorio Vardanega light and sound piece, which some of you may remember as being in the stairwell at the base of the stairs in the museum. We also have a little Mark Tobey painting on paper here that you can kind of see tucked into the corner. And this is, I believe, a photo that was taken for her birthday, for Bessie's birthday, and then hung on the window. Is that correct? Yeah.
Yeah, it's what she's wearing some glasses because it was the eclipse.
Oh, right, the eclipse, yeah.
Glasses on, and so they took a picture of her with those on. And as you mentioned all the roses that she's holding.
You told me that she received a red rose for every year of her life. So
for every birthday, she would receive a beautiful, huge bouquet of long-stemmed red roses.
Wow. Wow.
And then my father's
piece. A piece by your father, yes. And Tanja, you had mentioned, you told me a really lovely story about remembering how the Günter Hese sculpture would kind of move and vibrate when you remember playing the piano when you were younger in the house. And I thought that was
Bessie played the piano. She played the piano. My grandmother and I'm, so I was learning the cello, and I started when I was 9, and so we would play occasionally together. And this piece wasn't always on the piano, but I have a memory of it being on the piano and noticing how all these little springs would shiver and shake, because these are Günter Hese was I believe a self-made artist, and he would take art clocks and watches that had these tiny little springs. So it's not a large sculpture, and you can see it on the piano. It's not a very large sculpture. So these little delicate springs would just vibrate with the slightest amount of vibration from the piano. So that tied in with a nice memory that I have playing with my grandmother. And yes, I played the piano as well, but not very well. And the Vardanega, the piece next, the one with the columns and that I remember very well, because it has 20 switches or so, and we would play with them because each time you flipped a switch, there would be another sound and another color. And so we would just kind of go, well, I was crazy just with all these switches. And I remember that when it was in the museum, before it was programmed, I would get permission to, when I had some visitors, to show them how it worked. And then what I didn't realize was at some point that got changed to a program, and I went and switched a few things. And at this point, you really can't do that anymore because it's programmed. So I got in trouble for that one. I know now not to do that anymore.
It's a truly interesting piece, and I'm going to reinstall it in the museum when we reopen. It's an edition of 6. Not all 6 editions are accounted for, but there's an identical version of this at the Centre Pompidou in Paris. And I think, you know, you can see here, you're looking into the dining room, and there's the Degas hanging there. You can really see how they kind of just stuck artwork wherever it would fit in the house, with this very heavy sculpture sitting on top of this radiator cover. I just love to see how they really lived with the artwork. Just makes it feel a little bit more personal. And Günter Hase is such an interesting artist. The first time I saw this work in the collection, I was so drawn to it, as so many people are. He was a German artist who was known for his work with the School of Dusseldorf. He was really interested in scientific theory and cellular structures. And if you have a few minutes to look him up, I encourage you to do so, because he's just such an under-recognized artist in the history of European art, and just such a fascinating person. But let's see, this brings us to the final slide of our talk. And here we're looking into the interior of the indoor pool that Vivi or Tanja, you had mentioned earlier, that's in the basement of the house, where you can see a number of works by Niki de Saint-Phal, including Vive Moi and a group of 3 untitled fiberglass sculptures. And what you see up here on the wall, because some people ask this all the time, it's not a Dan Flavin, it's actually a work by a Swiss artist named Christian Herdig, who's kind of relatively unknown and completely unknown in the United States, but was doing phenomenal work with light and space and sculpture in the 70s. And I just love how it's installed here. And in other versions of this photo, you see it cast these amazing kind of light shadows across the pool. I heard rumors that this was at one time used as a towel rack, but I have 2 people here who can either confirm or deny that.
Vivi.
I did not use that as a towel rack. I would say what's not on the photograph is help me out with the name of the artist, the white sausage.
Oh, the sofa.
The sofa.
Yeah.
That was where we put our towels and hung out. There is a door behind the Niki sculpture to the right. That was where there were places for the towels. And the towels were as large as hand towels. The size you got. And so many good memories swimming in the pool, heated pool, dark granite, just.
We were scared of going in there, remember that?
It's a dark pool. So little wading pool there where Niki is diving into. It's maybe 3 feet and then it gets deeper. We did, again, splash the Niki pieces. Grandparents were fine with that. It was, you know, she's diving in, we're diving in next to her. Sometimes, again, incorporating the art and living with the art.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we did a little bit of restoration on here this past year, and you also mentioned to me that you didn't realize it was a female figure until recently. And I think you thought it was a frog.
A frog.
You like frogs, Vivi.
I have frogs. I know. They're all frogs to me.
But I think that I really love that we have work by Niki de Saint-Phal in the collection. We have so much work by her husband, Jean Tinguely. And one of my favorite items in the collection is a letter that Tinguely wrote to Hans after Hans had requested to visit Niki de Saint-Phal's studio. And he actually mailed her instead of mailing him directions on how to get there, he actually drew a map of how to get to the studio. And we have that in the archive. It's just a really phenomenal piece. And the fact that they bought these incredibly fun works by her kind of early on in her career is notable. I also love that they were just next to the pool. Seems so risky,
but again, it was not about, it was their value of their art. It was not, they bought because they loved the art. Mm-hmm. They bought art for their offices because they valued the importance of art for the soul, for what it does when you have art surrounding you, versus valuable, don't touch, live with it. Yeah.
And this room, I mean, I've heard that there were lots of parties thrown here. What you can't see in the picture is that there were a number of Victor Vasarely pieces hung on the opposite walls as to what we're looking at right now. And there was a giant couch shaped like a noodle, which we actually have in the collection. It's in storage. Very large couch, but
that's the sausage Vivi was talking about. You climb on.
Noodle sausage, right?
Slide down on and have our wet towels on and be on there with our wet bathing suits.
Because that was the couch. That was the only piece of furniture in there.
Oh, I wish I had a picture of it here.
So they wanted us to use that. Please use that as a sofa.
Mm-hmm. And it was designed by a Swiss designer, but this was really the only piece of furniture that I've been able to locate by him. So it's was made out of foam and some sort of plastic fabric. So it's yellowed quite a bit over the years, but we do still have it, which is exciting. But I think I'm going to wrap up unless you have anything else you'd like to add about the swimming pool. Nothing else. And we'd like to thank the Bechtler family, specifically you, Tanja, and Vivi, for graciously agreeing to participate in this. Couldn't be more thrilled that you were our guests for the inaugural Zoom Cocktails and Conversations. And to all of our Modernist and Firebird members for their ongoing support of the museum. And of course, Mitchell Kearney for the photographs of the interior of the Zurich house that were used in this presentation. But I think Bob's going to open it up to questions if there are any. You're on mute, Bob.
No, I unmuted myself. I just texted you. There was a question that said, did you ever damage or destroy a piece?
Okay, so as gracious as my grandparents were with, the art is to be part of life, we're living with it. Apparently, I did stick my finger into the springs because they were shaking. I never knew that I broke it because they would never have said anything about that. But I learned that years later that I apparently, when I was very young, little, did that. Because it was
for which work, Vivi?
Intriguing movement for a young kid where you just want to see the reaction when you poke it. But again, never reprimanded, never said, don't touch or you broke this. Or so I think we never really, we didn't damage. We didn't really mess with the.
There is supposedly the Marino Marini horse. So they had the 6 grandchildren riding that horse for over many years. And supposedly when it was evaluated by, I believe, Sotheby's, they said the patina was slightly damaged from
well worn.
I think they actually had to resurface it a little bit, but they put something on it. And then I also remember the Vasarely, the tritium. So if you look on the height of about a 4-year-old, you might see a few smudges from a little finger that was...
I've noticed those.
But Yeah, Vivi's right. They never said anything to us. They might have said, "Oh, don't touch it," but at that point, it was already jam on it or whatever.
Well, I'm going to add that note to the file. And what's interesting, what you said about patina, there's an interesting story about this Giacometti woman. When it was sold to the Becklers, Giacometti himself was actually unhappy with the patina that had been put on it by the foundry, and he wanted the patina to be much lighter, which is unusual because you don't really see his work with a lighter patina. So he and his assistant actually went and refinished the piece before it came to the Bechtler family.
But again, remember also the upbringing was somewhat formal. So you don't run around. You kind of learn how to live in that environment without having been told, don't touch this, don't grab that, without, just because there was a certain amount of formality and especially when the grandparents were in their 70s, 80s, and then 90s, because they're older, very rigid, early breakfast, always noon lunch, very scheduled day. But, they're older, but so you kind of learn, I guess, from modeling how you don't run around and grab and terrorize. So.
Well, we're thankful for that.
I have another question. It was mentioned that, quote, art feeding your soul, quote, was the environment that you grew up in. How have you been able to honor that tradition in a very different time and space?
That's a great question.
My father has always said, go and build your own, because to me, it is a memory book. So when I go to the museum, it doesn't matter where the pieces are. Those memories are very personal. They're with you. Pieces are with you wherever they hang. It's a journal. And so it's more a journal from my grandparents, from when they purchased it all the way through their life that they shared with us. So we get to have that, our journal piece, when we were visiting them, and very much we try to purchase in art as often as we can, or definitely have started collecting and continuing our journey. But, right.
Yeah, we have pieces from local artists, in our house, very large pieces that, to me, I don't think I would have ever bought, a huge piece by Marek Ranis or Maya Godlewska, and so it's really thanks to being exposed. Why is that important to even support artists? So growing up with that definitely has, I can see why it's inspirational. It's different, makes you think differently, see things differently, how somebody else would see it that you might not have ever seen.
And also, right. And also, I mean, we grew up very much going to museums and looking at art going to shows. And my grandmother would, the takeaway is, tell me one piece that you really like, that you would take home with you. Just to kind of, and not overwhelm you when you're younger. And I do this with my daughter. When there's a show, I don't want to hear, let's not go. I say, you know what? We're going to go for 15 minutes. We're going to walk through, and then you choose. We'll stop where something catches your eye. And so if you leave the museum with just 1 to 3 impacts, something that impacts you, then I've accomplished the goal.
That's really great. And there's so much that I haven't mentioned, in this presentation that, Hans Beckler was so involved in the art scene in Switzerland. He was the founding president of the Giacometti Foundation, which was a position he held until 1991. He was also the chair of the acquisitions committee at the Kunsthaus Zurich, and his brother was the chair of the exhibitions committee. He was highly involved in so many major acquisitions for museums and collections in Switzerland, and his impact, was so far-reaching that it's hard to include it in every little talk we do about the collection. But I think it's really important to understand that they really lived in art, a life surrounded by art, and they really loved art, which is so apparent in just all of the personal connections and stories that surround all of the works in our collection.
I have two more really good questions. One is the home still, I know the answer to this, but it's a good story. Is the home still owned by the Bechtler family, by a Bechtler family member? So the history of the home after Hans and Bessie.
It is not. It was sold to a German family, and then it was sold again recently. They've done lots of upgrades to it. It's still from the street, looks the same, but yes, not in the family anymore.
Well, my grandfather Hans, he asked me, what do you think should happen to all this art when we're no longer here? And I said, well, I think it would be great to have it just as it is now, keep it in the house, and then people could come and view it just as you all have it. And so he just kind of listened. Of course, that didn't end up happening because it takes a lot to have a house, and then make it into a foundation. It just takes a lot of time, a lot of finances to do that. So, and we wouldn't have had the Beckler Museum here in Charlotte. So.
Okay, a related follow-up question is, was there a piece of work that your grandparents held near and dear? One that was personal joy, didn't necessarily share with the grandchildren, but near and dear that you're aware of?
I think there were many, many.
I mean, the dish style, I always thought was his favorite. You're talking about what, yeah. And then the, Tanja helped me, the piece in the foyer was Großmommy's favorite.
The Tridium? The Vasarely? Which one? The foyer?
No, I'm blanking, I'm sorry. The red by the office, before you get to the office on the wall to the left.
Yeah,
Red.
The red one, right? Red and blue, the Max Ernst.
The Max Ernst. Yeah. Yeah, he mentions that piece in his memoir, and he also mentions the Rothko painting that he purchased.
Oh, the Rothko, of course. That's right.
So they did visit Rothko. It's a fascinating story. They visited Rothko in his studio twice near the end of Rothko's life when he was preparing his paintings for his chapel in Houston. And they purchased one of the very dark-hued paintings. And in his memoir, he talks about what a special experience it was. And he had very strong thoughts about how to light the Rothkos, and how he thought that Marlborough, the gallery that they were shown in, where they lit them all wrong. And so I assume that was one of his ones that was near and dear to his heart, which we do not have in the collection. But
to me,
that was hers. That was our grandmother's favorite, the Rothko.
It was, okay. That's so fascinating.
What I remember is whenever they got a new piece, they would be like, "Oh, this is the best one we have yet," and they were so excited about it. So, the piece that is out on the little balcony of the museum, the round piece,
the Max Bill piece,
right? Max Bill. When they first got that, my grandmother took me to the piece, and she's like, "Oh, I got to show you this." And she took my finger, and we went around on there's a little edge on that piece, and if you keep going around and around on it, it eventually, you realize it goes to the other side through the little hole in the middle, and it's eternity.
Mm-hmm. And the fascinating story about that is, I'm sure you know this, but Max Bill was a kind of a curmudgeon. but he was very close to your grandparents. And they really wanted that piece, but he did not want to sell it to them. So Bessie told him that their wedding anniversary and birthday and Hans's birthday was coming up and that she had to have this piece. And so she convinced him to sell them the piece for that reason.
I didn't know that. Wow. That's amazing.
Well, they had many parties, you know, in the foyer living room, where Maisie did all the cooking, all the catering, and to celebrate when new pieces came in.
I love that. And, you know, I think also I'd love to add to this conversation, there were also not only concerts at the neighbors' houses, but concerts at this house as well. And, you know, Tanja is a musician, and that's a way that she's carried on this tradition of art. I mean, music is very much a part of the Beckler story as much as painting and sculpture and fine art is. And I just kind of wanted to say that. And, you know, I don't know if
And they're big patrons of the arts, all the arts.
Yeah.
And in, right.
Yeah, they went to the opera.
And those opera seats are still in the family. That is still in the family, their seats. And family members continue to go.
That's wonderful. And Tanja, you've been giving concerts on your lawn and your back patio during this time. We have a link to one of the videos on our Museum from Home page, but I love that you're sharing your music, continuing to share your music with your neighbors and your neighborhood. It's just so much in the spirit of.
I had no idea that this was going to be something that, you know, the neighbors love, and every either Saturday or Sunday we do it, and it brings people outside. It's not like they have to come listen, but it just kind of everybody perked up a little bit, and it was just I was really surprised what that did, just a little bit of music. But it really changed the whole feel of the neighborhood. And I walk around now in the neighborhood and people are like, oh, are you going to have music again? And you know, the kids come out and they have their skateboards, and it's just, and really anybody that's, you know, you can have kids playing, but I guess it just goes to show that the music, the arts, what a shift that can create.
And I have to say, I don't think I've said this to you, and actually your performances are maybe what I miss most about our programming at the museum. And on the first night that I arrived in Charlotte for my 4 days of interviews last year, I rushed from the airport to get to the museum in time for one of your performances. And anyone could have done anything over the next 4 days, but I was sold after listening to your group perform and seeing the audience respond to the music. So really kind of a special performance for me.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
And I certainly hope after we get through this situation, because it's definitely impacting all of us. I definitely feel the music is very powerful as we're in this situation. And I do hope that the arts will be seen and elevated more when we come out of this.
Well, any last lingering questions, burning questions from anyone in the audience?
Okay, so the only question, I actually have one. Unless I missed something, did you guys expound on the bookcase at all? Did you guys talk about the lithographs and what happened after dinner?
We did.
You must have blanked out for a minute, Bob.
I guess I did, because I was trying to make sure we covered everything, but
I was going to say that bookcase used to be
full.
Packed. You couldn't put anything else in there, so it's definitely. Some people had moved some things out at that point, because these pictures are already after our grandparents had passed away. And each one of those books, I know a lot of, the books that I guess our side of the family have been taken apart and some of them framed, which is really nice.
Mm-hmm. Well, so many of them contain incredibly rare lithographs and prints by modern artists. And for me, they're one of the really interesting sections of our collection, you know, which we often feature on the second floor of the museum. In August, I will be opening an exhibition of the 1 Cent Life portfolio, which is one of the lithograph portfolios in the collection, which might be on this bookshelf over here, can't tell. But just to say that these are just as significant as the paintings in the collection, and I believe your grandparents felt that way too. You know, they they loved multiples and editions as much as they loved singular works of art. And I think that's a really important thing to continue to respect when we're organizing exhibitions and talking about the collection.
Well, no more questions on this end, and this has just been so fascinating. And Anastasia, Tanja, and Vivi, I mean, so grateful to, I mean, this is unprecedented that we have this, and during this time to, you know, be able to, this is an opportunity. So I'm hoping this went well, and I'm hoping we continue this series in some way moving forward. And Anastasia, thank you so much for all the work you did to put this together.
Of course, Bob, I'm happy to. And I hope that moving forward, we can continue to share some, you know, new and uncovered stories that maybe aren't as familiar to everyone in the future. So more to come.
Thank you for having us. Thank you for asking us.
Of course.
Are you kidding?
So lucky that you said yes to this.
Are you kidding? Yeah, and thank you all for joining us. Our biggest supporters, and we're very, very grateful that you would take the time. It went better than I thought because of my technological issues, but
our dress rehearsal was a bit of a Saturday Night Live skit, I'm not going to lie.
No, it was. So, but this was better. So thank you all very, very much. And I've never ended one of these things, so I think we should just do so.
Well, please.
All right. Well, so long. See all of you soon, I hope.
Thank you.
I hope so.
Bye.
Goodbye, everybody.